While I may be considering a number of things, I do know where I land on this. When an individual sets their mind to task, they can do almost anything, but not quite everything. Rarely does anyone have every piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Most of us, at some point or another, stand upon the shoulders of giants who have led the way before us, men and women of conviction, patience, and a willingness to accept the necessity of the shared team. This week, the world saw its leaders meet in Brussels at the NATO alliance. Those leaders arrived with all of the pomp and circumstance afforded to persons of distinguished positions. And then they promptly began their discourse over what's wrong in the world. At the end of the two-day summit, everyone smiled, shook hands, posed for photos, and then got on their private jets and went home. But anyone feel that we really accomplished anything? Yeah, me neither. Most of those folks, before they even landed, had already taken to the internet to beat their chest and talk back various promises and commitments that were made. Meanwhile, half a world away, another group of leaders were meeting. These weren't elected officials who wore the title of leadership. Rather, they were leaders because of the actions that they were taking. Nameless, everyday heroes from many nations came together to save 12 young boys and their soccer coach who were trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand. The world didn't send these folks in the same way it sent our leaders to the NATO summit. No, these were volunteers who brought with them divers, food, oxygen tanks, and most importantly, the human ingenuity to solve the overwhelming problem of how to get these kids out of miles of darkness, terror, and floodwater. And they prevailed, but at great cost as one of these heroes gave their life in service to others. These persons of different nations, genders, races, and faiths saw a need and took action. Now, my faith tells me to be of service to others. It's hard to remember that sometimes, though, as we see the world begin to spiral back to days of fear. And while I understand that as sovereign countries we must work towards what is in the best interest of our citizens, but oftentimes what's in the best interest of others is also in the best interest of us. When we hoard our resources, our ingenuity, and our collective protection from evil, those less fortunate will suffer, and suffer dearly. Imagine for a moment if the Allies in World War II had not worked together and shared with one another those things that each could bring to the table. Imagine instead if the world had tried to stop Hitler only one nation at a time. It never would have worked. We needed Russia to share its troops. The British resolved to harden the skies. And the USA, we needed the industry to provide war materials and liberty ships. All this had to occur so that we could persevere. It takes great people to make great nations and great nations to change the world. So as always, I urge each of you to take the time to reflect and listen to your neighbor. How can you be of service to them, and how can we all be of service to one another? My message to our world leaders? Act like it. I recognize that you are paid to talk, to gather, and to debate, but at some point you must also come together to act. The purpose of discussion should be progress, not victory. We don't need TV cameras to save the world, and sound bites don't help the sick, weak, and downtrodden. Our actions do. Finding myself somewhere in the middle. I'm Seth Denson.